first of all, people call you CL
Yeah. Yeah,
because
my full name is Carl Ludovic Lindsay the Third, which is awful. So I've
yeah,
been CL since I was born.
it's
So,
fancy. It's a fancy
yeah,
name. Are you a fancy man?
king or something. Yes, and I can't live up to it.
It's very fancy. Well, the thing about you, CL, because I know our paths have crossed. I don't know, not in person in many years.
No, but we've been like listed. Our books were listed together and things like that. I remember walking up to you at a NACA conference and saying, "Hey, we're sort of connected, man. Do you
Yeah,
remember that? Like, I think my
yeah.
book and your book, and then my book. More people have seen Bigfoot than bought it, and your books went to the moon. So
I got very
that's
lucky. I
where our
got
paths
very lucky.
diverged.
Well, I just think you do such interesting work, and I think what you do is so valuable. And I know that sometimes I would go to a campus and I'd see you going the next week, or I would be going and you would go,
We
and
barely missed each other at Alma, I think, a year ago, right? It was
yeah,
you were there 2 years ago. Did you
yeah,
go back there this year?
I
I haven't
did.
been back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going back, and it's not too far from me, so it's pretty easy.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm based in
It's a home
Chicago.
for me.
Yeah. But I think you are so interesting, and I'm so grateful that you are able to take the time because, you are a road warrior, you are an expert, 25 years. How many years were you doing this?
98 I started, so yeah, a little more than 25. I've
Yeah.
been doing higher ed law and nothing but it for 25 years now.
It's such an interesting area and it's so needed and there's so
We just
little education that's reliable.
there is there isn't now. And when I started,
Yeah.
it's hard to think back 25 years, but
Yeah.
nobody was talking about lawyers in higher ed, and now it's an everyday thing.
Right.
So it's when I started telling people, they'd say, "So you're going to teach at a law school?" And I'd say, "No, I'm going to help people with their legal problems in undergrad," and they just couldn't wrap their minds around it. Now,
Right.
everybody's talking about law and higher ed pretty much all day, every day, at least at higher ed, because it's tough out there right now. There's a lot going on for
There
sure.
there's so much going on and you have a background. See, you are so unique and you have talked to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of students. And over the years, you've really seen things progress. And I
Yeah.
know there are so many parents and there are so many students who have legal concerns. And I really was so excited when you said yes that you would come on here because I've always wanted to have a really meaningful conversation with you. And the idea that I get to have it with you and I get to share it with other people is just the best.
Well,
So,
I'm thankful to be here. So it's reciprocal. This will be
well,
fun. It's time. It's time we talked.
yeah. And I'd love to even I know that we're just starting our conversation, but I have so many people who reach out to me and there are so many different issues related to law. And in terms of just even being able to offer answers from someone who has a really deep understanding. If you're ever interested in that, I would
Yeah,
love
no,
to.
let's definitely talk. Yeah, we'll keep this going. I am
Yeah.
slowing down off the road now with my new job, so but I'm happy to reach out in other ways now, which I'm not able to as much.
Well, I think
So
it's even better now because you're not on the road educating. There's you again, like you really are unique in terms of your value, in terms of your perspective and life experience. And I mean, I don't think I'm really that effusive when it comes to being being someone to heap on praise, but just in terms of protecting students, helping parents to stay informed, and really offering some sort of guide. Like there's a huge gap there. So, I know some things, but you know a lot more. So
there's
now,
a gap, and in the undergraduate space, I think parents are pretty well informed now, but in the undergraduate space, just like when we were in college, there's a lot of misinformation too. There's a lot
right,
of, oh, I think this is how these laws work, and therefore I'm going to rely on that, and then that can lead to
right.
big mistakes.
I think a lot of parents aren't informed. Like I mean, maybe the ones that reach out to you, but just in general, everything is so new, and parents don't know what a FERPA is and in terms of HIPAA. And so the way I want to structure our conversation, because there's so many things that I want to talk about, but I really want to make it very easy for people to be able to find what it is they want and what they're interested in. I mean, everything is going to be relevant, but I really want to be deliberate in going through uh, some some things to do if something happens and the things to not do. So
Right.
structuring it in, what do you do if this happens and what should you not do? So
Okay.
I know that you have hosted thousands, tens of thousands of events. So when you're talking to students and they bring you in to educate students, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So when you're having that conversation and you start that off, what's, top of the list, the number one thing that you share that you want to communicate?
Well, it depends on the arena. If we're talking about doing things online, which I talk about a lot, the number one thing I say is if you wouldn't do it without technology, don't do it with technology. Because 99.99% of the time, that'll keep you out of trouble. The best example right now for that, I think, is unsolicited naked pictures.
Okay.
And that happens a lot. It happens way more than you think. So much that states are passing laws about it right now. Um, Specific laws. Texas was the first, Virginia was the second.
Yeah.
And these are people who would never in a million years pop out of a dark alley. That's sort of it's always portrayed in the media. Pop out of a dark alley and open their trench coat and be naked. But for some reason, when they get online, they change how they think about it. So that's the online stuff, and that crosses to lots of things online. You would don't trust people you meet online. You'd never trust them in person this easily. Don't trust them when you meet them online.
Right.
If we're talking about student discipline, sort of you're at college and you're maybe in trouble.
Right.
I know this goes against most of our instincts, but generally, if it's something minor, and we're not talking about sexual assault or anything big, something minor, if you fess up, you're going to do a lot better. And you have to remember, you're not in a court of law when you're dealing
Right.
with student discipline. So if you say, and if it's a first offense, yeah, I was drinking underage, they'll say, thank you for telling me. And they will go so much easier on you. I've seen, and if you start
Wow.
fighting or trying to get legalistic, you're not going to have a big courtroom moment and win the day because it's not a court of law. You're not going to win on a
Right.
technicality generally.
Right.
So that's with discipline, with sort of off campus parties. Noise, 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 noise. The number one reason that anybody gets in trouble starts with noise. And then, of course, the subset or a side thing is, watch out for each other. If nobody died of alcohol poisoning or from falling down a flight of stairs for 10 years, we'd probably lower the drinking age, or we might, but so, watch out for each other. Call the police whenever anybody's exhibiting any of the signs of not the police, call an ambulance, any signs of sort of alcohol poisoning. I've talked to so many fraternities where somebody died of alcohol poisoning and they didn't call anybody because they were afraid they were going to get in trouble. And then, the person died and they say we would get kicked off campus 1,000 times if our buddy was with us. So, have each other's backs. Don't be afraid to call in ambulances if you need. And that's
Right.
this generation drinks less, though. Or our current students drinks a
Right.
lot less, but we're still seeing it. We're still seeing hazing. We're still seeing alcohol poisoning. It's just not as prevalent, which is great, which is wonderful.
Right.
That
Right.
was a wide ranging and
Great.
rambling answer. Is
That was
that
great. I think
okay?
it does kind of shape what the conversation can be, and I was taking some notes as well because with each of those, I want to be able to dig deeper, and I also want to go into, a couple other situations because I get a lot of people who will write to me about very specific situations,
Right.
and, so what I wanna do is present that situation, and then you can tell me what to do and what not to do, and you kinda touched on that.
We all know off the top of my head.
Yeah, well, you've been I think I think also in terms of your legal background now, do you practice law?
I haven't practiced for a long time now. No, I graduated Michigan Law School in 96. I practiced for about 5 years, uh, like in a firm, sports and entertainment law. And then I had a professor friend call me with a legal problem, with an academic freedom problem. And I went and helped him and said, God, this would be way better than the grind I'm in New York City. And I quit and started just helping. I started a nonprofit that helped college kids. About 5 years in, it actually didn't make sense to keep the license. It's a lot. It's a lot
Right.
of money, and it actually was better to sort of go in and say, "Hey, I have a JD. I'm not practicing. I'm not offering legal advice. I'm teaching you about how the law works, and it works a little bit better for me that way." So,
Yeah.
also, it's really nice to not have your local friends call you with their Yahoo legal problems. I can say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I would love to help you out of your fifth speeding ticket, but I don't practice law anymore."
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah,
That's definitely a good out. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
but you know how to read legal
Oh
documents, you
God,
know
yes,
how to work through you know how to work through laws, and also in terms of like a step by step, a triage approach
absolutely, yes.
to when students and when parents are working through this. So a big issue that has come up, and I did a post about this. A student reached out to me, and they were accused of using AI to write a paper. And the student shared with me, because we had a lot of back and forth. The student
Yeah.
shared with me that they were 100% not using AI. Like, they really were not using it, and they had notes to back it up, and they had their Google Doc, and they went to the supervisor, and then they went to the head of the department, and even as far as the provost, and they continued to tell him that he was guilty until proven innocent, and he was punished for something he didn't do, and was really devastated. There was the time and energy and emotion of fighting this, and then there was the reality that he didn't do something wrong, but yet the technology is not in a place where it can accurately, with more certainty than should be, uh, it's unreliable. And
The
and
technology
this
is
this
incredibly unreliable. I was about to. My question was going to be. I'm assuming it was from some AI detector software that said that this person had cheated. That was their proof.
That is my understanding, and that then goes to the question, this okay, so if you are a student who is accused of using AI to write a paper or do whatever it is you're doing, what should you do and what should you not do?
Well, a lot of it comes before the accusation, and that's a lot of legal and disciplinary problems. Taking the correct steps to cover your tracks, or to be able to show your tracks actually before you run into trouble is one of the main things. And it sounds like this student had some of that. Um, so being able to show here's my outline.
Right,
Here are one of the things you can do. He might not have, or he or she might not have done this. Um, if you have sort of track changes, like the ability to do that on a software program, so we all work in Microsoft Word, and you can show all the changes, do that and keep a copy of that to show that it didn't just all change at once. That hey, look, this
right.
sentence got reworked 3 times. AI doesn't do that. There's not a great way out of it. If It seems strange. The other thing that I wonder, and I'm not disparaging this student, um, we're all supposed to come into every single incident with an open mind and look at it as a separate incident. If there were other things in the past,
Yeah.
if there were sketchy things that happened in the past that could have affected this, that sounds strange. If he was able to show her, you said he, right? It's a
Yeah, so
he.
he said
Um,
yeah. Not
if he
only
was able
that,
to do his work, it's really odd. But to in his defense, like you said, they're really, really unreliable right now. In fact, they're so unreliable that Turnitin and the other big ones, they stopped publishing their reliability stats. They used to say, "Oh no, it's 95%." They
right.
don't do that anymore because they're just too unreliable. And the thing is, professors are so worried about it, so
They
they're going
they
to lean on
are.
this technology. I think the last year they put Genesis in, and that came up as highly likely that it was that in the beginning God created heaven and earth was written by AI. And if it can't pick that up, then what can it do? I would also maybe you do some research about how unreliable these are. It sounds like they were not listening. That's not my experience with this kind of thing. But if you know, if a judge is against you, if a disciplinarian is against you, it gets really, really hard to advocate for yourself.
But what happened is I shared this one, shared that message and posted it, and then I received. I mean, I can't even count how many messages from students and parents who were wrongly accused and wrongly convicted and had no recourse. And this was not a unique situation. And then I posted a poll, and very informal. There was about 640 people who responded to it, and it was the question of how many of you have been wrongfully accused of using AI, and the number was around 42%, 44% of students were accused of wrongfully using AI.
Fascinating.
So, yeah,
Did
so
you
it's a
did you ask how many were you disciplined? Uh,
that could be the next question, but I received a bunch of notes of, people got zeros, and what happens is they get the zeros, and then they have to go through the
yeah,
judicial process, the review, and that takes an enormous amount of time and energy and emotion that
it does.
right,
Yeah,
pulls them away from their other studies, and it is, it's very unfair, so
and best practice is the long way around, which is first try to work it out with your professor, and that's almost always your best option. Is if you can one-on-one work it out with your professor, and then you keep escalating. And the funny thing is, from professor to dean, the dean's going to back up the professor. And even up to the provost is going to back up the dean and the professor. Sometimes, if you go higher, you can get things overturned.
who will be
Um,
higher?
the president, depending on the size of your school, or
True,
certainly the president of Wisconsin's not going to listen to you. But if you're at a small liberal arts school
right.
and you make a really good case to the president, there's a possibility you could do something. But it is incredibly trying to go through all that.
So to offer a roadmap, so when someone is accused of using AI and they've been wrongfully accused, so the first thing they should do
First
is
is gather your evidence. Gather anything that you can put together that shows that you did this on your own, that shows that it was not AI. And remember that then think of it as making a presentation. So keep something short, go to the professor with your evidence, and try to make sort of a short 5 minute look. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This all shows I didn't do it. I promise I didn't do it. And again, it's in my experience, professors are pretty good at knowing which students may or may not have done this, not based on past practice, but I think you're probably there in your life too. When somebody's lying to you, it's pretty easy to tell. So if you go in and you've got good evidence and you're believable, that's your best shot. So start there. If they don't go anywhere, you've got all this. If that doesn't go anywhere, you got all this evidence. Um, letter to the dean of the school or division or whatever you have.
in writing,
Really
something in writing.
yeah, in writing, yes. And by the way, um, certainly include your parents, and your parents can help. But in my experience, advocating for yourself is almost going to do better. And if you like hire a lawyer or something or get somebody in there at this stage, it's probably just going to muck things up. So advocate for yourself, something in writing to the dean, and see where that goes. And the squeaky wheel will get the grease. That's your best. Just somebody who's really done something wrong generally gives up after a couple of no's. If you're
Right,
tenacious enough, and maybe go up to the provost, then you've got at least three people who somebody might hear your side,
right,
and then maybe escalate all the way up. And if you're escalating all the way up to the president, maybe a parent calls then, because the
right.
president is often thinking about the university as a business, you know. So there's a chance there that they will say, oh, well, this is the person who is paying the bills.
Right,
I can listen to them. So, but that's the call based on your president.
right, right. Then if you go to the top and you are still wrongfully accused and convicted, then what type of legal recourse do you have?
It's real. So a lawsuit's not going to do anything. It's going to be so much time and energy. I mean, you could try to lawyer up. Um, and I should put a caveat in this. A lot of what I know is up for is subject to change. So it used to be that you could tell me a case that maybe would go to the Supreme Court, and if you gave me the facts and gave me some time to think about it, I could probably predict what was going to happen. And that's with sort of any judge. I'd be like, yeah, probably come out this way.
Right.
The courts are really unpredictable now. And
Right.
that's not just the Supreme Court, it's all the way down. There's activist judges and things. But um, colleges are risk averse. So having a lawyer send a letter might move things along, but it could have the opposite effect. They might just shut down. But it used to be what I was getting to. It used to be that if you got in front of a judge, they did something called academic abstention, which was they would just say, listen, we're not going to get in the middle of this because who are we to get involved in colleges, especially how colleges teach people. Now, that seems antiquated now, like especially the news like this last week.
Right.
But historically, whoever sues the college loses because they say we're not going to get involved because colleges don't really sue people for this kind of thing.
Right.
Um, so I would actually say try to wheel and deal a little bit and maybe say, listen, I understand that you guys think I did this. If this is going to go in my record, I'd like to be able to put something in the record that I'd like to put a letter and a summary of my evidence that I put forward in the record. If you can put that in there too. So that might give you something and they'll probably just do that, but it's not
Right.
going to be in your transcript. If it affects your GPA, that's not going to be in your transcript and you're probably just going to have to let it go because if you go into a job interview and say, hey, that B or that C shouldn't be a C because I got accused of this, it's not going to really help you.
Yeah.
So,
It's
another thing is private schools, if it's a private school, they can do almost anything they want. You know, they're beholden to their own rules. Oh, the other thing is check the student handbook. By the way, a good survey to do is how many of your listeners have read any part of the student handbook, the rules, the policies, do
right.
alcohol, and then say how many of you have broken the alcohol laws. And I guarantee there may be check the student handbook, go through it with a fine tooth comb. There
Right.
may be some sort of grievance policy where they get to go in front of an academic dishonesty panel or something. And if so, definitely go there because there'll probably be
Right.
students on it who will fight for you.
The problem, CL, is that when I'm talking to people about this, a lot of times it's a first generation student. It's someone who
Yeah.
doesn't have, parents who are as informed. It's someone who is just really inexperienced when it comes to being a self advocate. So, in terms of guiding them and supporting them, they really are at a disadvantage.
Yeah. And in that case, there's a huge difference between having an outside lawyer or a parent get involved early on. If they have a favored professor, a professor they have a good relationship with, go to them.
Right.
Go and say, hey, this other professor is accusing me of this. I didn't do it. You know me well. Can you just help me navigate this? And
Right.
they'll probably know the politics of what's going on in the department way better than you, even if they're not in that department. Even if
Right.
it's an English professor and you have a great history professor you have a relationship with, ask them for advocacy, and I'll bet you'll get help
Okay.
that way.
It's very helpful. I mean, it's a big issue. So, those are great places to start. And then what if you are accused of using AI or academic dishonesty and you are guilty? What should you do?
Chances are, so uh, almost always fessing up. Listen, if it's for a major project that's going to be a huge part of your grade, I understand the urge to then try to fight it.
Yeah.
But in this, with the temperature being what it is with AI, um, chances are they're going to say that you did it. If you actually did do it, chances are it's going to come out with a finding of responsibility, which
Right.
means your best option is to fess up really early and throw yourself at the mercy of the system and say, yeah, I made a huge mistake. I want to learn from it. It was so much pressure, that I was under too much pressure. Maybe I took too many classes, something like that. And will you allow me to do something else, bring my grade up another way. But if you fight it, fight it, fight it, and you did do it and they got you, it's going to be harder to do that.
So from your experience and students talking about fessing up, I don't know if you have any stories or anecdotes from, students who admitted that they did it, that they were guilty. Is there a certain approach, that can maybe temper judgment? And I think you kind of touched on it a little bit before, but what can a student say, or how can they frame it in a way where they can hopefully get the most empathetic, compassionate response?
So, well, also situations are infinite, and it depends on who you're dealing with. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is so what they think is that we have the academic side, and then we have the discipline side, and they forget how much crossover there is. And really, the people who are in the disciplinary side are also there to teach, and that's at the basis of the whole system is about teaching. So the key things to hit are, um, I want to learn from this. If you say, and contrition, contrition is such a big thing.
Yeah.
Like, there's a big difference between, yeah, you got me, this sucks, and yeah, you got me, I made a mistake. And I want to take responsibility. So contrition, I want to take responsibility. I'd like to learn from this. That'll get, and I've been on both sides of this. I've been on the, in the rooms where people are deciding these things. And when somebody comes in and says, oh God, yeah, yeah, you got me. They leave and you're talking about what you're going to do. And everybody says, oh God, that was a good kid. It's not, and by the way, for most things, and there are things you should fight tooth and nail. If you're accused of really serious things that could possibly be criminal, that's a whole other thing. And that's a decision you have to make. If whatever you're accused of on campus could also have criminal ramifications, you got to think about, pleading guilty and can it be put into evidence and things like that. But if it's something lower level, they're not going to be focused about the fact that you were drinking underage. They're going to be focused on the fact that you fessed up,
Right.
because they've probably done that too. You and I were both in college. The person who is the head of your housing at your college, they were in college once too. They understand minor mistakes.
So you've
Um,
been currently in your current role,
yeah,
you are in charge of judicial review, student conduct, like, those
I'm
are
in
things.
some stuff. I'm technically I'm the Title IX coordinator and the Deputy Office of Civil Rights Compliance coordinator, which is a mouthful.
Do we still
Um,
have those?
what, Title IX coordinators or?
Civil rights.
Well, yeah. I've spent a lot of my last couple of months looking at executive orders and trying to figure out what they mean and what we may or may not need to do.
Right. I wasn't
Uh,
being silly. It's like in terms
no,
of
no.
what rights students
Um,
have and don't have, it's very
it,
muddy.
it's incredibly muddy right now, and yeah. And I used to, I one of my areas that I've studied is free speech, and it's gotten tough to decipher where lines are. And it always was hard. It just wasn't in the public eye, and it wasn't meant to be decided instantly. Um, but yeah, I mean, in my present job at DeSales University, but I've also consulted at lots of schools. When I go to a
Right.
school, they pull me in and say, "All right, we're dealing with this really weird case. What should we do?"
Right.
And I got to tell you, one of the pieces of information that will be given to me will be, yeah, and they fessed up, because that's a critical piece of information.
Right.
And if
So
you didn't do it, don't fess up. But if you did it and it's
right.
minor,
That
fess
really
up.
goes a long way. I
Yeah.
I want people to understand, so when a student is accused of something, whether it's underage drinking or the academic dishonesty or something that violates the code of conduct, at most schools, there's some sort of judicial review, and most students aren't aware of that. And I would love for you to, if there's a way you can, I know there's different situations, but if you can give us kind of a summary of, what that looks like, so a student, know
So,
what's coming.
um, well, we had to at the start take sexual assault out of it, because there's a law called Title IX, that has very specific requirements of what colleges have to do. But for most other things, the things that most students will run into, which is underage drinking, noise violations, I don't know, vandalism in your room or something like that. It will go through the judicial conduct system. And to reemphasize, the other side of when I was saying that teaching is really what discipline is about, the other side of that same coin is it is not a court of law in any way, shape, or form. And we have this tendency to sort of think that to take what we think we know about the legal
Mhm.
system and superimpose it onto college discipline. And that's just not the case. First thing, and if you're at a public school, it might be a little more wishy-washy, but really only if they have campus police and you're being charged with a um, criminal violation. But still, things like search and seizure. Um, the Fourth Amendment doesn't count in on-campus discipline. Um, Only because all that happens. So you know what the Fourth Amendment is. Your right to be. You have a right to be secure in your personal property. The police can't search you without a warrant, et cetera, et cetera. So you're in your dorm room, your residence hall room, and they find beer. And an RA finds beer. Number one, that's not the police. That is not the government. Even at a public school, it's a little bit widgy about that. Then number two, all that happens if the Fourth Amendment is violated is the evidence that's found can't be used against you in a criminal trial. You're not going to go to a criminal trial. You're going in front of a judicial board. And then it varies a lot by, and then there's also the standard of proof. Um, you're accused of a major crime, or most crimes. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. You're not supposed to put numbers with them, but maybe 90, 95%. Um, Most colleges are preponderance, which is more likely than not, which is 50% in a feather. So the standard of proof is very low. So, and that comes back to online stuff. If there's a picture of you doing something, it is more likely than not that you were doing it.
Right.
Although AI will change that. And then the process varies depending on the school. For most first infractions, you'll probably just go in and sit down with somebody from judicial affairs, and they'll say, "Hey, the RA found a 6 pack of beer in your room. You're 20 and you're in a dry hall. What do you have to say for yourself?" That's probably what'll happen, and you can say, "I didn't do it." And there's not gonna be a long, you might have an appeal process, or you can say, "I did it." Yep, and they'll say, "All right, take an online alcohol course and don't do it again." Um, it'll be something like that, and for bigger things, I deal with sexual assault. There has to be a live hearing with cross examination of witnesses, and you have a right to counsel and all sorts of things like that. So, and that's from the 2011 Obama administration. Sort of, they were the first ones to really put a judicial requirement on
Yeah.
top of colleges.
So when someone is charged of something, a lot of times there could be a quick way of dealing with it, but if they have to go in front of some judicial review, do they? Because I get this message all the time. This is where I think of you. I think of you a lot because I get these students who are like, "Okay, I am being charged with this," and let's say whether they did or they didn't do it. My recommendation is one is see if there's a professor who you can turn to, who could
Yeah.
at least inform you so that you have an idea. You could also go to the office that's conducting the review. This is where I get a little confused because it's like, well, if you're talking to people who are conducting it and you're talking to them, then you're
So,
disclosing things.
but they're not going to be. So they're not going to be adversarial. They're not. It's not like going to the prosecutor and asking for help, like in the real court system. They're not going to be
Right.
adversarial. If you go and say, "Hey, I've been accused of this. Will you show me? Just tell me what the process is. Can you point me to the right part in the student handbook?" They'll absolutely do that, and that actually probably will help your case because you'll get to know them, and
Right.
they'll say this is somebody who's actually trying to solve a problem and figure this out, rather than somebody who, I mean, on the other end, there are students who just don't show up when they're
Wow.
supposed to come in and talk like
Right.
that. So that would be the other side of it, and that, of course, that's not gonna win you any points. So you can absolutely go. If you are the case law on this, there have not been a lot of times in courts where this has gotten to gone all the way to litigation and gone to a judge and been decided, or a jury. The case law is a little bit sketchy, but if it's something where you could be expelled from college, or a long suspension, and we're not quite sure what long means, um, you do have what a property right, which sounds weird. because it's not tangible, but you have a property right in your diploma that you haven't actually earned yet. But you have a property right in your education. You've paid something for it.
Mhm.
You are owed some due process. Um, it basically means due process is, there has to be a process that you get to sort of tell your side of the story. And that's basically all the courts have said. You have to have notice of the charges against you, and an ability to review the evidence against you, and a chance to tell your side of the story. That's basically the whole of case law on due process for suspensions and expulsions. And that's much stronger right at a public school than a private school. This
So
gets really complicated really quickly. I
well,
hope
you've
I'm not.
mentioned it a couple times. I mean, these are broad strokes, and it's just,
Yeah.
where do you start, and how do you work through this? So if you are, uh,
Student handbook. Student handbook. That's your very first step always. See what the policies are. And if the only time a college really gets in trouble, public or private, is if they don't follow their own rules. So if they
right.
don't follow their rules, then you do have a really good case with a lawyer. If
Well,
you can
that's
afford.
where, if we go back to the AI piece, and this is something I was in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, where they were talking about, not all schools have policies. Different departments will have different policies. Different professors will have different policies. And what that policy is and how it is communicated can vary. And the technology is changing so quickly that this, it's so hard to prove that. And then the policies are changing. So this is where,
I was changing fast. Yeah, I was at a school last fall where their policy defined plagiarism as taking the work of another person and holding it out as your own. And I said, "Have you guys looked at this? You can't have person in here. It has to be taking the work that you did not create and holding it
right,
as your own." And I don't think you'd be able to get out of it. It was a private school, so they'd say, "Well, you know what it meant." But yeah, the policies are changing fast. Uh,
so with those students, I tell them to talk to your you can talk to your professor. You can talk to someone who, your professor, another professor. You can go to the office that's going to be conducting the review.
yep.
Sometimes schools will have student legal services that are just part of the school. Uh, is that something that you've seen be beneficial for students who are working through these issues?
They tend to be more about off-campus issues, like landlord tenant and things like that.
Okay.
They're usually very large schools, and therefore, hey, you have a problem, we can help you. I think it's worth a try.
Yeah.
I would think that they would be slow to get into a full-on advocacy role, but they would probably be help you give you
Right.
pointers. Certainly, go to them and say, "Hey, this is the letter I wrote, trying to show that I didn't do this. Can you take a look at it?
Right.
And and does it make sense? Do you think it helps? Can I make it better? What
Right.
am I?"
So a parent gets a call, or a message from their kid, and the kid's like, "Hey, listen, this is what's going on." Whether they did it or didn't do it, the question of, at what point should a parent get involved, and what type of involvement helps, and what type of involvement can be hurtful?
Uh, in the beginning stages, it'll be absolutely best for the parent to stay in an advisory role, so not directly contact the school. The urge is going to be to call the school and yell,
Yeah.
and I totally get that. But that will and so this is, you were just saying, should I go to the people who are going to make the decision? The person who gets the phone call may be a decision maker. So I said, yeah, you should go in and talk to the judicial affairs or academic affairs, whoever is going to adjudicate this, and ask for help. But
Hmm.
that might move you forward. They might like you then. If you go in and scream at them, that'll do the same thing. And if your parents go and scream, that'll do it, in my experience, times 10, because not only is this somebody who's not willing to work with us, they like went to their parents, and they're trying to, we want to teach them, not
Right.
their parents. I would think at some point during appeal, if it gets up to the provost or something, then a parent could be involved. It's up to them. And I would think the stance of the parent would make a big difference, rather than
Right.
a, hey, this is crap, and you're gonna change this for my kid. Hey, I'm here with my child to support them, and we want to try to come to a
Right.
resolution on this. Will work much better.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. And I think that the parent, reviewing any correspondence, and this is I
Absolutely.
think so important, the writing, put it in writing, put it in writing. You can talk about it, and even if you talk about it, summarize it and put it in writing, but make sure there's some timestamp and some summary of what the discussion was.
Do a return receipt on the email, and don't use AI to help you write your response.
Ugh,
Because that won't help you. I've actually seen that.
that's
So
the word, right? You're being accused of using or
yeah,
whatever it is, but just in terms of a judicial process or judicial review is, read the handbook, uh, connect with those people who can be, uh, supportive and guide you. When you're corresponding, make sure you have someone review what it is you're writing,
hmm
and, whether that's a parent or a trusted, advisor,
professor. Yeah, advise.
professor.
You'll have an academic advisor. That person wouldn't be bad to go to. They're
Right,
sort of in charge of
right. So it's like this.
shepherding you through.
Right, so you have to go through, and I think being reactive is probably detrimental.
Yeah, yeah. I uh, I never write when I'm trying to deal with something going on with me. I always write something and sit on it for at least a day,
Yeah.
um,
Are you
and
pretty
let
reactive? Pretty
the,
hard.
yeah, well, yeah. There's still a little
Emotion.
bit of water left in me, and so how dare you is typed often and then erased a day later,
I get
and
hot,
say,
man. Ugh, I do it.
so yeah,
It's a
simmer
big
down.
right, so you gotta settle down, you gotta settle down. Okay, so that gives people an idea of what to do and, how to approach this. And then if you okay, so if you're a parent, let's talk to the parents for a second, okay?
Okay.
So if you're a parent and you really want to support your student, just in terms of your legal rights and limitations, if you have an 18-year-old, can you please very clearly articulate what some of those challenges might be and how a parent can avoid encountering these obstacles?
Well, are you referring to FERPA
FERPA,
or?
HIPAA, just in terms of just like step one, do you
Yeah,
even have the legal authority to converse with people about your child?
no, they don't have to. Some places will, but they certainly don't have to. So FERPA is the Family Educational Right to Privacy Act, and it controls what are called educational records. And there's a long definition of that. It's a very difficult law to wade through. Have you ever looked at it, Harlan? It's rough. Looked at like the code
No, I
when
I actually
when
I haven't.
when it was being debated on the Senate floor or whatever, one senator called it a masterpiece of wretched draftsmanship. It is a tough law to wrap your mind around. And there's all these exceptions. But anyway, it basically says once you become 18, the educational records belong to that student. And if you go to college and you're under 18, you're basically are 18 for purposes of FERPA. So if you're a college student or if you're a high school student who is 18 or over, parents have no right to see the educational records of their students. Um, that didn't used to be a big deal because parents didn't used to look for this stuff. Now parents really want to see it. It's really easy to get a waiver. Most colleges will have right on their website, here's how to fill it out. Most colleges, if the parent wants to be involved or know their kids, uh, their grades, that's fine. But that getting access to educational records does not give you a right to talk to a professor. And in fact, most will not talk to a parent about a grade. They'll be a little bit indignant that you even tried that. I don't think you get. They probably won't return your emails. It just allows you to see their grades, just really
Right.
their transcript. And exempted from FERPA, nobody ever has to show unless you're subpoenaed in some kind of court case. Nobody ever has to show personal records. So if a professor keeps notes on class participation or something, that's not an educational record. That is a personal record. So you'll never have access to anything like that. But it doesn't give you all the FERPA waivers in the world will not give you a right to discuss your child's grade with a professor and have them justify it to you in any way, shape, or form. It
So
just
no
allows
waiver? So even if you have a waiver, the professor still doesn't need to discuss that?
no, and they wouldn't, and they probably shouldn't. They might if but they don't. No, it
Right.
just allows them to see the grades.
Okay, so FERPA, so you and your family, a student and their parents can decide if they want to sign that waiver. Then the other piece is HIPAA. So, how does that work when a student is 18 and they're on campus?
They need, if the parent wants medical information about what's going on, they'll need to have a HIPAA waiver, because once you're 18, and that's not like FERPA, it's 18. It's not once you're in college. They'll need to have some sort of waiver to get
Right.
information. And if the student says, I don't, the child says, I don't want the parent to have that, they won't have it. And if you're in a situation where somebody is not conscious or whatever, there could be a next of kin, but that might, think that takes time to work out. I actually advise that every parent gets a medical power of attorney, for their student. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but it shouldn't be for the state that you reside in. It should be the state that they're at the college, whatever state they're going to college in. So if you live in Michigan and they're going to someplace in Illinois, get an Illinois one. They should, they absolutely should, translate, right? They should cross states. But if it's midnight and there's been a car accident and you want to talk to somebody who's not necessarily the hospital's counsel, you want to be able to email over or fax over. Hospitals still use faxes for some reason. Fax over the form that they're used to looking at. You want to say, look, here's an Illinois or here's a Michigan or here's whatever. Here it is from your state, and that will get you the easiest access. So that's my advice to parents on that front.
Okay.
HIPAA does it too, but it's not necessary if you have a medical power of attorney.
So you want it from the state. Well, you can get it from both states, but the state where your student is
No,
going to school.
I just really the state the student's going to. I mean, sure, if something happens in your home state, but you're going to have the ability to be there. If they're home over the summer, you're going to be there, and you can bring it in and say, "Hey, I have it for Illinois," and you can do a little more negotiation. But if you want to get both, that actually wouldn't be a bad idea, just in case.
Well, I think if your student's 18, if your child's 18, you would want to have that. You just need to have that so that
You
you
should,
can.
yeah.
So what happens? And see, I don't know if you've dealt with this or heard of families that dealt with this, where they have a child who is going to school and they're hospitalized for some reason, and then the hospital reaches out. The student's not conscious, can't communicate, and then maybe there's a friend there and has the parents' number, so the parents. So, like, that facility is not going to. They're not
They
going.
they will. They will eventually. Just might take some time.
Well, if they
Uh,
don't have a power, if the family doesn't have a medical power of attorney, then what goes on when the hospital says, your child is here, who determines what type of treatment?
it would be next of kin, and then it would be the parent for sure.
So next
But
of kin, even if you don't have the power of attorney.
yes, yes. But if they're not so the situation I'm thinking about is they're not unconscious. They're just not. They're just in the hospital, and you don't know what's going on. And you're calling in the hospital and say, "I want to know what happened to my kid," and they say, "We can't tell you that. They're 18. You know, they're in charge of their own medicals." And then you can say, "No, no, I need to know," because it's more a paperwork thing,
Right.
and speedy. It's mostly you're going to want to know fast, so have it ready to go in case you need it.
Even have
You
it
know,
in your phone, have it in your pictures.
yeah, absolutely. Have it in your iPhone
Right. So you can just so that's a really.
as long as it's password protected.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing that everybody should have. So a HIPAA release is different than a medical power of attorney.
Yeah, it's yes, that is just releasing records, whereas medical power of attorney is making decisions.
Okay. All right. So let's do. Are you good with time? Because
Yeah, yeah.
okay, cool,
How long have
cool.
you been on? Oh,
Well, I
yeah,
mean, like about like less than an hour, but I've
yeah,
got a bunch of things I want to do. I want to just knock some of these off because
yeah.
I want to talk about just to give you kind of a preview. I want to talk about hazing. I want to talk about when someone's renting a place. If you could even give me some sense of that, of like what should be in whose name, and then I also want to talk about sexual assault, and there's a lot of different areas there, but I want to, as much as we can talk about it. Uh, so you're you're a student who's being hazed, and how would you how would you, I know there's a definition, and I know the definition, but when someone people don't know what hazing is. So, can you please tell us what hazing is?
It's when you are when you have to do something um, that either puts you in more risk than the normal thing would, or is dangerous inherently in some way. Um, to either enter or maintain membership in a group or a club. And when I said have to do something, just because the person who is being hazed said, "I will do this," that isn't definitive because there's a power differential.
Mhm.
So, and I know I feel like there's a third part to it. We just switched gears fast. And I gotta say, it's funny. People always associate hazing with fraternities and sororities. It's actually the number one hazing by like a couple percentage points now is sports teams,
Yep.
but it's everywhere.
And
Um,
bands like,
bands,
performing arts.
performing arts. It's big in performing arts, especially like marching bands. Um, so there was even a case, University of Virginia, a couple of years ago. There was a sorority that required 25 study hours a week during pledge week or whatever initiation weeks, and they were found by the school to violated hazing, their
Oh,
hazing policy because and the students complained, the initiates complained and said, "Listen, I'm really busy. I don't have enough time, and this 25 hours a week is making me tired." And they found it, and they actually went to court, and
wow.
the court said, "Yeah, that qualifies as hazing." So you hear all these cases of drinking 90 drinks and or drinking 19 drinks in 90 minutes and fraternities and things like that. Most hazing isn't actually that newsworthy. It's usually smaller than that. And it's still happening. 100 people died since 2020 in
Yep.
hazing incidents,
Yeah.
almost always involving alcohol. I think I'm
So
right on that stat.
it's yeah, it's absurd, and it keeps happening, and it's I get really upset about. I was hazed pretty badly when
Right.
I was in a fraternity, and what happened is I had transferred, and I was in this fraternity, and the rituals you go through, uh, dealing with anywhere from getting lined up and getting slammed against a wall to really being pushed physically, and of course like being just degraded, just verbally, and sleep deprivation. And the thing is, I didn't really feel like I had anywhere else to go. This is one of the reasons why I tell students you have to have options. You have to have your three places, or at least two places, because if you have two places, you have options, and when you have options, you have power, and when you have power, you can set boundaries. And when someone does something that is hurtful or harmful, you can take action. So, I felt very powerless. I didn't take action. I had a message every year. I get messages from parents. One of them saying, my students being hazed terribly. They're really upset about it. They're too afraid to report because they're afraid of retribution, because
Yeah.
they think people will know. So if you are a student who is being hazed, what do you do? And if you're a parent of a student who gets that call or learns that your student's being hazed, what do you do?
If you're a parent, if you report it to the school, they will take it very seriously. They will absolutely investigate. The problem is, and you know this better than I do, probably, the culture is that they're not going to be able to find much out unless somebody somebody's willing to talk, and they circle the wagons pretty quickly. If you're a student and it's happening to you, and I said dangerous. I left out humiliating.
Right.
That absolutely counts as hazing as well. Um, if you're a student, I would add on to what you said about have three places and remember that even as initiates, you have power. Because if people stop joining um, the fraternity stops existing. So
Right.
they need you. They need you to live there or pay dues or whatever, or else the it dies. I would try to get others on board. Certainly, you can report on your own, but if two or three go, and if two or three go and say to the leadership, we're not going to put up with this, they're going to have to listen to you. I know it must be impossible to sort of think that when you're in the midst of it, and because they're very good at making sure you don't think that you don't think, but you do remember you have power. Um, it's usually, in my experience, I've dealt with a lot of hazing cases. In my experience, it's usually a few people that in the leadership that are pushing it forward. It's usually, and then everybody else goes along. And so, uh, if you can help weed those people out, um, it's a big deal. From the legal standpoint, as a parent, and I have nothing against fraternities, and I think they can be a great experience.
Right.
Um, I would think seriously, whether or not somebody joins a fraternity, that's one decision. I would think very seriously about letting my child be an officer, especially social chair or recruitment chair, but any officer at a fraternity, because even if they're not there and something goes down, something, God forbid, horrible like a death, those students, the officers are going to be the first ones to be sued. And, there's a lot of complex legal things that can happen about attaching homeowners insurance policies, or if they're over 18, the parents can, not take responsibility, but who's going to do that? Or there's ways to do that.
Have you
There
seen
are a
that
lot.
happen?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Like, what's
The
the
piazza,
case
the
of somebody?
piazza is still. Oh, have I seen parents push their
Well,
kids to the
no,
side?
no, this is what I wanted to know, because if a parent says this to a student, "Hey, you shouldn't be on the executive board. You gotta be really careful." Is there a specific example of a student being on an e-board, an event happening, and a student who seemingly wasn't involved firsthand being held responsible? I mean,
Yeah, there
that's
was, and it wasn't the, so Timothy Piazza is one of the cases everybody's talking about right now. That was the Penn State case. Um, it's not coming to mind right now, but there was recently a case in the last couple of years where, yes, that exact thing happened, where he was either the social or the recruitment chair, and he was not there, but the court implied that said that basically, listen, you had knowledge, you had control over this situation. It was your program. And even if people went a little bit rogue, you're somehow responsible.
right,
Um, and,
right.
and there's lots of cases where, they weren't present and the case got dismissed against that student. And by the way, we're not just talking civil liability. There's also criminal liabilities.
It's a felony.
Yeah, it's a felony. There's all sorts of new laws coming out. The Stop Hazing Act just got, which is about reporting, but still just got
Right.
signed 2 weeks ago. Um, you're still going to have to defend yourself. Even if you win, you're going to have to defend yourself, and you don't want to do that. And fraternities can be great. There are so many other leadership positions on a college campus that I told my relatives, please just don't do that. Do anything else, but that's
Yeah.
just a thing. And by the way, you can't avoid all. If you're the captain of a sports team and it happens as a sports team, you're going to be sued as well. And no, I would, it's that seems like I'm singling out fraternities, um, but nobody said don't be the captain of the swim team. But like
Right.
recruitment chair and social chair are the ones they go after, and that's somebody who's in charge of hazing, potentially, or parties.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that the e-board is automatically, culpable for the, whatever happens, or they go to them first. I don't know if culpable
Not
is the right
automatically,
word.
but
I'm
there's
using
going to be a
fancy
civil
legal,
lawsuit.
right?
Yeah, not automatically, but they're the most likely. Yeah,
Right, you gotta
yeah.
defend yourself. Because I always tell people, like, "Listen, if you're hazing someone, first of all, you're committing a felony, right? You're committing a felony, so if somebody wants to report that, you're gonna be in a lot of trouble, and then if you're doing it and, God forbid, something, goes wrong, well, then, not only will you have the legal issues, you're gonna, you know they're getting thrown out of school, dealing with going to jail, defending yourself,
Civil suits,
civil
settlements,
suits. Right.
$100,000, and so I speak to a lot of fraternities about this. And then the other side is, um, take all that away, and you're never ever gonna, the rest of your life, it is going to haunt you. I've talked to a lot, like same with the letting people drink too much and trying to cover their tracks and things like that. Um, Forget about going to jail. Forget about paying hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yep.
You let somebody down, somebody dies on your watch.
Yeah, right.
That's you're not going to ever get over that. That's the rest of your life. That's as a lawyer, I often get into the weeds on you could get sued, and I sort of get out of the if you let somebody die because you were like making them drink and recite Greek letters or something, you're gonna carry that in a really horrible way for the rest of your life. And I've spoken to a lot of fraternity members, um, not generally hazing, but like have let something horrible happen because of too much drinking, and they'll never be the same. I mean, that's take the law. We can take the law out of that, but yes, felony, yes, civil suit.
Right.
Um,
It's not just what's gonna happen to me, it's also, of course, the impact to everyone else. Because I
impact.
didn't mention that as much when I was just talking about it. I was like, of course, like, that what you're talking about, the emotional toll
The
and,
other thing is the national won't help you. So uh, probably if you're in a fraternity, you are paying a lot of money for insurance, and they will train you. Um, and they will say, "Hey, if something bad happens, call us because we're going to help you." So you'll call them, and what they generally do, and this is national fraternities, local ones operate a little bit differently. The national ones will come in and they'll do an investigation, and the investigation will probably show that whatever was being done at that fraternity was outside of the realm of what was covered by their insurance policy, and then we'll use that investigation to then not cover it with the insurance policy that you have been paying a lot of money to your dues towards. Um,
wow.
they will hang you out to dry.
Wow, it sounds like you've seen that happen.
That happens. Yes.
It's common
Yeah.
practice. How does
Counterpart.
someone protect themselves from that?
Well, the best way is the other side is, hey, be the recruitment chair and make sure no hazing happens, or be the social chair and make sure everything's right. But I don't know, was FIPG around, the fraternity insurance programming group, when you were in
Not
college?
sure.
So, I mean, the rules are really strict. I haven't looked at exactly what they are, but in the last 10 years, they've said things like, you can have parties with alcohol, but it has to be BYOB, and everybody can only bring 4 drinks or something like that. So
Right,
every party you've ever seen at any fraternity or sorority ever is outside of the insurance policy.
right,
Um, FIPG used to be the insurer. They stopped doing that, and they became just a programming group. They just
right.
were programmed and said, "This is look at your policy, look at your insurance policy, see what it says,
It's
and
like
don't go outside of it." But I guarantee you, it says such restrictive things that whatever you do is going to be outside of it.
right, and, like, how many 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds are looking at that? It's just you're put in a
Read your
situation
homeowner's
where
insurance policy. I haven't read my entire homeowner's insurance
right,
policy,
me neither. It's an
and
impossible situation. Right, so a parent who's like, "I don't want you being an officer." It's, I was an officer. I was like the security guy. What was it? What was my title? I ran for something. It was like but there was hazing, and the thing is, I tried to get the hazing to stop, and I said, "Let's instead of doing hazing, let's make people do public service," which I guess would be hazing too, in a sense of like requiring them to do a certain amount of public service. But they were like,
depends if it was too much.
right, they didn't wanna do it. Nobody would do it. So, all right, let's move on to, well, let's just say, if you're someone who's accused of hazing, uh, that's something that could have legal ramifications. So, it's really important for you to consult some sort of legal resource, some qualified legal advisor,
If somebody got hurt, absolutely, talk to a lawyer.
right? Talk
Talk
to
to
a
a
lawyer.
talk to a local lawyer. Yeah, if somebody was hurt and you were involved, talk to a lawyer. If nobody got hurt and it's an internal investigation on campus, it's a little bit different. So
Right,
then maybe mea culpa.
right.
Um, but it's one of those things. The best action is to not do it.
Of course.
If you fess up, even the laws are so strict now that they will. And I hate saying this because it feels like telling people to lie, but I'm not saying that. The organization is going to be punished pretty harshly and probably on suspension or at least probation for any
Right,
kind of hate. And I think that's the correct route. But
right. and they should. So when it comes to the decision of a student reaching out to a lawyer versus working through the situation themselves, what is the, what would you say checks the boxes so that somebody should reach out to a lawyer versus doing it by themselves?
Well, certainly, like I said, somebody's hurt, and then there's probably a level of severity.
This isn't just hazing, I'm talking in general. Let's
Oh,
just go through, like, so
oh,
to make it a little bit more of a wider range issue of what is it I'm thinking, sexual assault, anything involving sexual assault, anything involving where someone is hurt or injured, anything involving something where you're breaking the law.
so if you
Um,
are accused, yeah. So if there are real potential criminal possibilities on the other side of the judicial process. So there's the two pieces: on-campus adjudication, the real court system. Um, if there's a possibility of some real criminal charges, talk to a lawyer. And practice varies from school to school. Some schools, if you're accused of something, let's say it's assault, um, if you're accused of that, they may pause the if and you've been charged under the campus policies and charged under criminal laws, they might pause the adjudication on campus until the criminal proceedings finish. Some won't. You certainly don't have a right to that. And if you go in and confess or give up evidence, or evidence gets shown in the adjudication process, that can probably go into the criminal process. So if there's real criminal liability, you have to make some hard decisions about if you're going to participate on campus, and you need a lawyer to help you with that.
right,
You need a criminal lawyer to help you with that.
right,
In the case of sexual assault, same thing. Um, Title IX mandates that students be allowed, not provided, but allowed an advocate of their choice who can be an attorney. Um, but that person's participation, we're under, there are all those lawsuits, so we're under the 2020 rules now. That person, what we refer to it as, is the potted plant. They can just be there. They can't run the show for you. The only thing they get to do actively is if it goes to an actual live hearing, they're there to cross-examine witnesses. But in every meeting, they are just there as an advisor. They can be there. They can't speak. They can only be there and converse with their charge, with the person who was accused, or the person who the respondent, that would be, or the survivor.
right,
Um,
right.
so I would say if you're accused of any kind of sexual assault on campus, I think it's wise to at least speak to an attorney. Um, and
And
go ahead.
I say if you are the survivor and you are reporting this, I know there's a procedure, and of course, when someone's in that state, it's very hard to even think through what to do next other than hopefully, if it's a student, they'll call their parent, talk to the parent. In terms of making sure steps are followed, would it be advisable right from the beginning to get a lawyer involved while
If
going
you're
through
if you're the survivor,
either? Yeah, I think on either way, because I know we talked about if you're accused, but it's also, there are so few survivors who are able to convict, their
so oh well, yeah. So that was the in an actual court setting, it's going to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the standard of proof is really high, and it's really hard for, if something starts out as a in a social setting, which most do, it's hard to get beyond a reasonable doubt on the consent issue, unless there is violence or something like that. Um, the standard of proof can be much lower. Colleges can pick one of two. Um, More likely than not is often the one, and it's a lot easier to get a finding. So it's not guilty on campus; it's a finding of responsibility.
right,
Not defendant, and it's complainant and respondent. Um, and that's why having a counselor, if you're going through the process, there's no chance of anything criminal, but you're a respondent. At least talking to an advisor, because the standard of proof is lower, And if you have something on your record that you were found responsible for something with Title IX, that can follow you around quite a bit. If you're a survivor, and this is for criminal or on campus, I wouldn't say talking to an attorney is that relevant really early on. I would say preserving potential evidence. And again, like you said, I don't know how anybody, it's going to be the most traumatic thing that happens in this person's life, probably. I
Right.
don't know how anybody has any wherewithal to do anything um, at this point. But, um, you know, so DNA in the criminal courts, DNA is going to be the number one evidence. I'm told it lasts 48 hours, maybe less. I think somebody has to, if you're a survivor, you have to make a decision whether or not you're going to have the forensic medical exam, sometimes called a rape kit. The thing is, that can be really invasive as well. So
Right.
then it's a traumatic event and a really difficult thing. I used to, when I was younger and was, all about the law and had less experience, I was like, yeah, everybody should get the rape kit because you only have one chance to get the evidence. And you can make a decision later on whether or not you want to go down that road, but you got to save the evidence. That was like sort of me just being a pure lawyer. Now I realize that that's not, it's a personal decision. And probably things like that may not be as important in an on campus adjudication. And you might not be able to get any kind of good result in the criminal court system. So it's a decision somebody has to make. What I tell people to do is, while you're making the decision whether or not to get the rape kit, is don't mess things up. So don't mess up evidence. So, and again, I don't know how anybody does this, but think about whether or not you want to get the forensic medical exam. And in the interim, don't change your clothes, don't take a shower, don't do all the things that you're actually going to instinctively want to do, right? Because you're going to want to get out of your clothes. Don't brush your teeth, don't smoke, don't eat, things like that. It's changing the clothes is the big one.
Yeah.
And if you have to change your clothes, you put them in a paper, not a plastic bag, so they can breathe, because plastic will keep the heat in and damage the DNA. I would say that's the most important thing. And then the next thing, probably maybe the first thing, is talk to somebody. Doesn't have to be a lawyer. Talk to a counselor. Talk to a trusted friend. Let somebody know. Statistically, most people go to a friend rather than to a counselor. And of course, if you're on a campus, there's going to be somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
I'm a Title IX coordinator right now. I, Everybody associates that, and I have only spoken about sort of laws and policies. If somebody comes to me, and this is something my current boss taught me, um, it's not about that. The first two questions, he said, he put it perfectly. It's like if you come across a car accident, the first two questions are going to be, are you okay? What can I do to help you? If you go to the Title IX office at any college, that's how they're going to approach it. They're not going to go right into law, into adjudication. They're going to try to figure out how to help you. And they're going to, even if you don't even make a complaint, a formal complaint, they're going to help you get through it, get you in touch with counseling, get you extra time on tests, figure out, like, let you take a leave of absence or take incompletes or whatever, do all sorts of academic stuff to get you through. So I would say talk to somebody you trust. That's the
Right.
best thing you can do.
Right.
Um,
I'm
and,
thinking
and,
of
and
oh,
help
so
you.
yes.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the parent. I'm thinking of the parent who gets the call. I'm thinking of the friend who gets the call, who's listening to this, because the things you said, even the idea of preserving your clothing, putting them in a paper bag as opposed to a plastic bag, and not showering and doing those things. I don't think these are things that most people think about or
No.
are communicated, and it's a lot about risk reduction. And of course, if anyone's in that situation, it's there it
Well,
is not.
first, if you think you're in any immediate danger, solve that first. If the person, depending on the situation, make sure you're out of danger. Make sure that you're not around that person anymore. And that's something that the college can do really quickly. By the way, they can put a no contact order in really easily. But yeah, there's short term and long term. The short term is what I was just talking about. The long term is just listen to them and accept their emotions. As a parent, I can't imagine a parent getting this call. That's got to be the worst call in the world.
Right.
Um, it must be so horrible, and it would be so hard to not. I mean, I would want to get, if I don't have kids, but I'm sure if I did, if I got that call, I'd want to drive to wherever they were and find the person and commit a crime myself. But really listening and letting people talk at their own pace and supporting their emotions. And,
Yeah.
this gets more into counseling than law. You probably know more about this than I do.
Well, I mean, you seem, just in terms of your role and just knowing that someone who is the Title IX coordinator, you're emotionally driven first. It's emotion first. And I think that you really communicated that. I was saying, of course, if anybody is ever in this situation, it's not their fault. The survivor is the one who has all the power, and it's really important to lean on the people who can help you and support you, and for family to know. It's like in these situations, it's triage,
Yeah.
and there are situations where most people do not have training and don't think that they're going to be in that situation, whether it's the person who's dealing with it or a family member. Uh, to be really clear, because people hear Title IX, like I hear Title IX coordinator, and it sounds very technical. It sounds very, uh, it's abstract. Can you please explain what a Title IX coordinator does and their responsibilities?
So it can be technical and it can be abstract, but really it's, if anybody has any kind of gender based discrimination. So that's sexual assault, but it's anything. This person said something really horrible to me and it was gender motivated. It's my job or the office's job to figure out what happened and try to protect the person, try to protect the complainant. And people go right to, and like I said, I already talked about it. The hearings with cross examination, the vast majority of things that come into a Title IX office don't even remotely get close to that. And by the way, I don't have any jurisdiction off campus, but if somebody comes to my office and says, this really horrible thing happened to me off campus, um, I can't have a hearing against a non student, but I can put what we call them supportive measures. It's really about supportive measures, a lot of it, which is, all right, you went through this horrible thing. What can we do for you to make sure to help you, give you the best shot at continuing your education?
Hmm.
Um, and so I work a lot with the Office of Student Accessibility, and it's almost always confidential. Like it's as confidential as it possibly can be. So I'll call the Office of Student Accessibility and say, "Hey, I've got a Title IX issue. For this person, they're going through a lot. They're having trouble in this class. We need to. What do you think? How can we make this work for them?" And the professor will never know what happened. They often won't even know that Title IX is involved because it'll be student accessibility. So it's supportive. And I think that really does get lost in how we talk about Title IX because it has become a big political thing. It also, because of discrimination, like what's going on at, I guess it's Penn with the swimmer, that would fall under it. It's a big political thing, but the day to day work is supporting students who are going through something bad and trying to help them. And by the way, even if, like I said, you have to file a formal complaint for anything to happen judicially, adjudication on campus. If you don't do that, you just say, hey, this happened. This person did this to me. I don't want to go after them. I don't want them to know I'm here. I just want you to help me. We do that. We will put supportive measures in place. So it's not as bad a job as it sounds. It's heartbreaking, but sometimes for all the honest thing, I speak for all the Title IX coordinators, but you're trying to help more than be a judge and jury.
Right. Are you always busy?
Um, I have the pleasure of going to a very small school of, and I know everybody says this, but we have not seen that many problems. It's pretty quiet, and I've spent very little time. I mean, I'm always looking at regulations and trying to make our policies better, but and I'm sort of the catch-all. I do a lot of other things.
Right.
Mostly, I've been reading. Like I said, yes, I'm busy, but it's because of executive orders and things like that.
Right. It's a
And
whole thing. How
yeah.
about cyberbullying? When somebody is being harassed online, what do they do? What do they not do?
So that's a really tough thing to deal with, and it's getting harder and harder because of the anonymity piece. So if it's just bullying and being mean, um, you know, certainly you could go to the Office of Student Discipline or whatever if it's another student. But trying to figure out who they are can be difficult. If you know who they are, absolutely. The problem is the school, depending on their stance, people do have free speech rights still. Um, So if it rises to a threat or to harassment against what's called a protected class, so gender based, race based, things like that, then the school has some ability to put some things in place. And certainly they might have a policy that says, you got to be nice to each other, but that
Right.
doesn't usually have as much teeth. If it rises to a threat, um, then and it doesn't take a whole lot to rise to a threat, then you can get local police involved. And a lot of these things that are anonymous aren't as anonymous as you think. And there's I'm sure like the Yik Yak cases. They figured out who people who were, putting in bomb threats within 20 minutes or something like that. So
Right.
I would these things usually obviously happen over a long period of time and sort of escalate. The earlier number one, trust your gut. If you're being bullied, trust your gut. If you think it might get to that point, you're probably right. I always say this to 18-year-olds: you're older, smarter, and more experienced than you think you are. So when your gut tells you something, trust it. The quicker you can get campus judicial affairs involved, so that when it does rise to the threat, they can be ready to go, the better. Um, and every college is different. But if there's an on-campus police force, just let them know. They might not do anything immediately, but most campus police forces are really about
Right.
community policing rather than cracking down on underage drinking and things like that. They want to help. So
Fake IDs. I had a conversation with a bouncer at a bar, and the video went viral. And in this particular bar, this is at Indiana University, is Kilroy's, which is like it's like a classic bar there. And the bouncer is saying that they take the IDs, then the excise police will collect the IDs, and then they usually shred them. They don't really do a lot with them. They'll just destroy them, and that tends to be where it stops. I thought if that's the situation for a student where they get their ID taken away and excise just destroys it, they're pretty lucky. Uh,
if that happens, thank whatever God you pray to and move along. Say that was the best outcome that could possibly happen from this.
Tell me more
Uh,
situations with fake IDs.
so it depends. It depends on that. I think is still most often common practice. Hey, this is fake. We're taking it. Um, depends on the state. Just like underage drinking laws, the penalties vary, the level varies. I think Florida right now, which makes sense, spring break capital of the world. Florida's got the strictest fake ID. I think just possession there is a felony too. In a lot of states, it's a misdemeanor. Um, a lot of things to watch out for are, which I don't think this happens as much anymore, but lending IDs could be seen. So, like, hey, you look sort of like me. Here, take my ID. I'm 21. Go to the bar. That could be distribution of a false identification. A lot of these laws were beefed up post 2001 9/11. So there are some really pretty strict laws about providing fake identification for people. But just possessing is enough to get you in serious enough trouble. It doesn't always happen. Generally, the you talking to that bouncer tracks with what I know. If you're a jerk, they'll call the police, and if you're not a jerk, they'll shred it.
Right.
There have been some cases. There was just a big case where I forget, down south, Vanderbilt, maybe? Probably not Vanderbilt. I shouldn't have said that. I don't want to besmirch Vanderbilt, but a case down south where uh, these guys started a ring of selling fake IDs. And, you can order, you can get sort of really, really convincing sort of whatever the templates, not templates, the actual pieces of plastic that you put over with the holograms. And they got busted for selling 1,500 or something and, faced real jail time. The other side of it is, so it's pretty easy. Back in our day, it was hard to get a fake ID. It was hard, the technology didn't exist. I remember people standing in front of Polaroids, right in front of a
Right.
big thing that was drawn, and you take a Polaroid and cut it out and laminate it. Now you can buy, overseas, you can buy all sorts of stuff. Um, the thing I would say to students is, number one, I totally understand you want to get into bars and stuff. I get that. By supporting those companies, they're not just doing that. These are the places that are creating these and selling these to make profits. The overseas are often into human trafficking, terrorism, really horrible things. And I think that's the best argument for not participating in that, because you are funding really, I know human trafficking is very much attached to these organizations. You're funding really, really bad stuff, aside from the legal part of it. But you can get in serious trouble.
Yeah,
Felony. I know it's a felony in a bunch of states. I know Florida it's a felony, and many other states.
right. So check to see what's
Look at
going
your
on.
local law. Yeah, yeah.
Right, in your state to know that. I'm gonna wind things down. What about when it comes to in terms of hate speech, in terms of being targeted? I know in terms of LGBTQ plus students, religion has come into it. If somebody is uh, a target of hate speech, what should they do? What do you suggest?
Definitely talk to the school immediately.
Mm,
Hate speech. So, and again, everything is topsy turvy right now. I'm not quite sure. I don't know that anybody could give good advice about what to do right now because everything is just up in the air.
right.
But there has always been a really, really difficult tension between the federal free speech laws and state free speech laws, which are generally about the same. So it's free speech laws,
Hmm.
and then hate speech or discrimination, really hostile environment discrimination, which is people saying things based on a protected class, so gender, race,
Right.
religion, that makes you feel so uncomfortable you can't be there. You don't want to be there. It's affecting your education.
Hmm.
Um, Technically, free speech, unless you're in one of the restricted categories, which is threats, incitement to imminent lawless action, um, uh, fighting words, which you probably know what these are. Like if I say something so inflammatory about somebody's race that they could legitimately come and fight me. So if I dropped a really bad racial slur in front of somebody who was that race, that would probably be a fighting word. If I'm in a room of a bunch of people who are not that race and I say something like that, that is not a fighting word because it's not imminent, right? Same with imminent incitement to lawless action. Hey, we should all go over there and do whatever. Unless you're one of those very, very small categories, or historically have been small categories, it's covered by free speech. Now, colleges then are covered by Title IX, which means that you can't discriminate based on gender, and Title VII, which is race, religion, creed, origin, color, all that. And colleges have been trying to figure this out. It's like literally a rock and a hard place. It's the First Amendment up, which is the rock, and the hard place are these other laws that say you can't allow hostile environments to exist based on these protected categories on your campus. It's a really difficult question legally to figure out. Um, and absolutely every college will say, of course. And again, private college, public college distinction. Private colleges can do pretty much what they want. None of them want to do bad things, but public colleges are bound by the First Amendment.
So a private college, because you've mentioned that a few times, the
Yeah.
difference between private and public.
So a public college is technically part of the government. So the Constitution, the whole Bill of Rights applies to the government, not to private actors. So, you know, uh, name a big company, they're a private company. They can, as long as they're not discriminating against you, if they don't like what you're saying, if what you're saying is bad for their brand, um, you know, they can fire you. Whereas you have free speech rights. The First Amendment, it's funny. People always think they'll say something stupid and get fired, or a private college will do something and say, well, I have free speech rights. The First Amendment says the government cannot fine you or jail you for what you say, for your speech. Speech is bigger than what you say. It can be clothing or, other things. Doesn't apply at all to private actors, which is interesting because that line's getting blurred right now because there's a lot of talk about Columbia and Harvard. They're private colleges. Um, so it's always been difficult. It's been difficult to figure out. My heart went out to all those college presidents. Free speech has always been much easier to figure out in hindsight. Where's the line, right? And the Supreme Court has decided all these cases, and those cases happen years after when people have, briefed. Like the
Right.
smartest legal minds in the country have briefed them and said, "This is exactly what, and this is what we think, and this is a legal argument." And they come down and say, often in a 5-4 decision, this is what we think. Colleges are in a really rough place having to make these immediate decisions about where to draw the line. Now, certainly, if somebody's breaking the law, that's not free speech. And threats. One of the exceptions of free speech is true threats. So if you're threatening somebody, you don't have a right to do that.
Right.
And take the public-private college part out of it. If you're threatening somebody, that's just against the law. So if you're threatening somebody on private property, it's still a criminal act, or could be depending on the situation. So um, it's going to be really difficult to go forward. What's happening now is self-censorship. No, everybody is afraid to do whatever, and that's not a good place to be either. We shouldn't
Right.
be. We shouldn't be too worried about what we're going to say. That there's going to be retaliation from somebody. We don't know who. Could be the government. Could be the college itself. Um,
It's it is
it,
super tricky. It's super tricky, and I think of I was thinking like you have your local media, you have your campus media. Hopefully they can give a voice to some of these things because there's so many. These are conversations that are going to be happening in the public forum because students are trying to figure this out, but they're
and I think
protected in terms of the most extreme
professors
situation.
and administrators are too. I mean, they're just. I mean, I spent a lot of my life thinking about free speech on campus, and I don't see easy answers. I never did.
Yeah,
And then when the temperature goes up, I think everybody's trying to figure out. I think we should all be able to talk about things, but it's difficult. It's difficult. These are really, really difficult issues right now.
right. We
Um,
know it's difficult when legal experts really can't come to a consensus, and these are being challenged. They're being challenged every day. So for a student who's in these places, just to kind of give them a little bit of a sense of control, that when something happens, go to someone you trust on campus. Go to a professor. Go to your advisor. Go to someone in the counseling center. You can go to the Title IX office. You can go to the dean of students office. You can tell
office of,
someone.
there is definitely somebody who there's an office of civil rights somewhere under. There's somebody who is a designated office of civil
Right.
rights compliance coordinator. You can talk to them.
Right.
Um, and then I would say, hopefully, the resolution. Now, every situation is different. If somebody threatened you or racial slur or whatever, discipline. But if it's like potentially misunderstanding, hopefully you'll go to them and they'll work out some kind of mediation,
Right.
or for lower levels, because we just got to start talking to each other again.
Right.
Um, but and then there's a line again. There's a line. I can't even sort of give guidelines because it's so case specific.
Right.
Context
Right.
and tone. I could say the same sentence to you two different ways, and it could matter. It could make a
Right.
difference in how to interpret it. So, but talk to and it doesn't have to be right to an official of the school. Talk to your friends. Talk. Remove yourself from the situation. Talk to people and get other people's ideas about what's going on, and then go to the
Yeah.
school. We don't always have to go. Getting perspective, third party perspective, is really good in free speech issues.
Yeah.
Um, and not just one person. Talk to a couple people. Say this happened. What do you think? Because everybody has their own biases.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where the advisors of whatever group or organization, I say, you go towards the love. You find the
Yeah,
people who are there to support you, who understand how things work, who know how the administration handles things and how the local law enforcement will handle things and what's been going on. And you talk to them and you figure out how to process that. And I think that what we've presented here is kind of a larger roadmap of how you work through these issues. The free speech one, you know, it's pretty tangled up right now. These
yeah,
other legal situations that we've covered, those are things that seem to be pretty straightforward. And the idea that you're at your campus's office, that you're there and you have this deep knowledge base is really terrific. So. Um, I really appreciate you. CL, if someone wants to learn more about what you do, if they want to check out any of your books, let
my
us
books
know.
are on Amazon. The most recent was written sort of as a textbook. It's called "Sex, Speech, Selfies, and Getting Smashed: Critical Legal Issues for College Students." That's on Amazon. If you Google CL Lindsay, I'm sure you'll put my name up someplace.
Yeah.
I can be found. Yeah. And the first book, it's been a long time and I haven't revised it. Harlan can attest to this. Writing a book is really, really difficult, and it's it's a miserable process. I keep meaning to update my first book, but the it's called The College Student's Guide to the Law. Some of that is outdated at this point. My publisher will now call me and yell at me, but that needs to be updated. But by the Sex, Speech, Selfies, and Getting Smashed is on Amazon, and even though it was written as a textbook, it's a short, easy
Right.
read. And consider DeSales. We're a wonderful, wonderful little liberal arts college.
That's great. Well, you
Yeah,
you are someone I'm really happy to know, and we'll do this again. And
yeah.
CL Lindsay, I really appreciate you, and thank you for being so generous with your time.
Thanks for having me. This was lots of fun.